Bees are totally essential for life. The famous scientist Einstein did say that if there were no bees, mankind in 5 years would be gone.
5 years.
According to Einstein.
Sorry.
But then again, might not be all true, because crops, like cereal crops, they do not need bee pollination. They require only wind. So we'll be able to have bread and beer. But no veggies, no nuts.
No veggies, no nuts, no fruit.
No fruit. Yes.
What do you think about that statement which Tilana just started with, about bees related to the cell phones, whether bees react on the cell phones?
Yes, beekeepers do not believe in it.
Okay.
They find it an urban legend, because some of us made an experiment. They place hives under those cell phone towers, and under them bees as healthy as in other ones in other place.
Okay.
It's a much more complicated subject, and it has to do mostly with pesticides and insecticides that stay active for up to 15 years. And those eventually they're going to decimate the bees, make them so weak that they are susceptible to catch up all sorts of parasitic virus, bacteria, fungi. Would be similar with a human with AIDS once the immune system is so challenged.
So I think what you're talking about is what I read is the colony collapse disorder, which is mostly happening overseas. So you're saying it's in America?
Yes, and in Europe. Again, it has been traced specific to some long-term active insecticides.
Yeah, so just for anyone who doesn't know what it means, is what's been happening was, you can correct me, Kim, is what is been reading on your website, is the actual, what happens with the colony is when it's obviously these pesticides affect the immune system of all the bees, and they fill up parasites, and most of the bees swarm, and they're swarming at odd times, so not when they're meant to be. And the bees that are left behind actually kill all the young bees that are still developing. And and it sounds like when they swarm, they then die. They don't go and create a new hive. And the whole colony basically collapses. That's why it's called colony collapse disorder. And that entire colony of bees just die. Basically, it sounds like almost commit suicide. They die.
They just die.
Basically, they are so disease-ridden, they have no defense against
any of the parasites.
Whatever, bacteria, fungi, virus, that virtually just collapses. One should see a hive might have 50,000 bees, but should be seen as one unit. They're all working together in unison. And once there is an external factor that diminish their capacities to work in a healthy way, it just falls by wayside. Yes.
And so that's why it's a concern, though, for us as humans, is because if all of these hives are just falling because they don't have the immune system, we don't have then enough bees to go and pollinate our acres and acres and acres of trees and crops and all of that. Because that's one of the interesting things about bees, is that we can. We are now farming in such a way that the local, you call it the local bees?
Yes.
There's not enough to pollinate, and hence beekeepers like you move your bees.
For instance, in South Africa, the avocados, macadamia, lychee in subtropical areas, the pears, apples, plums in the Mediterranean type of climate around Cape Town. They are totally dependent on beekeepers to move large amount of bees at the specific time of the year to pollinate that crop. The farmers, they have to pay so much per hive per day. because if they do not have those amount of bees to saturate that area for pollination, they cannot have crop.
Yeah.
They have to be saturated. There have to be so many hives per acre.
Okay.
And as you say, at that specific time when the bloom,
yes.
the flowers and blossom.
Yes. And for instance, in America, to pollinate the almond production, which is the world biggest, they have about, if I'm not wrong, something like 75% of production, the almonds, they need upwards 1 million hives. That come from all over America, and even from Australia. In America, they move them in refrigerated trucks to keep them pacified, and also half hibernating, so they do not need much food. They are not very active, and they just keep moving. Like they would spend the winter in Florida doing the oranges, and also getting nectar and pollen from the oranges and getting paid. And then as spring starts, they move gradually upwards for apples and pears, going further up into the more geographical areas that the spring comes late, so gradually they move north.
So hence the bees play such an important role, as you're saying, in it. And then, so what's been happening then with fixing the problem? Is there, or are we still trying to find out what is causing it?
Suddenly there was a lot of panic in Europe. So, for instance, a lot of Europeans, they ask South African farms to produce seed of all sorts of products, like carrots or onions. Like in Europe, suddenly they're realizing that the normal production, agricultural production, was collapsing. There were no bees. Also, the native species of vegetation, if they're not pollinated, eventually they will disappear. So they had to find out why or what. Suddenly the bees are disappearing. And there were all sorts of theories. One of them was the cell phone masts. And more has been accepted that the insecticides, pesticides, and because also we live now in a global village, what happened that virus that were only existing in Israel, one of those, another one in Australia, suddenly they've gone globally. And those, the local bees, they might have found over millennia defenses or human systems against them, but not the ones that in other parts of the world. And suddenly they were just decimating the bees left, right, and center. Other things that are affecting bees is the monoculture, which means for a beehive to be successful, to reproduce itself in a healthy manner, it needs lots of good quality and diversified pollen. But these days, because large tracts of natural vegetation had been destroyed to put monocrops, so they only have monopollen, so it weakens them. And those, I would say, they are the main causes: pesticides, insecticides, and monocrops. I suppose the beekeepers moving them around and work them extensively does not help either.
What would you say about the mites? How does that work? Because that's what I learned as well, that apparently this is the parasites which can just fly from one hive to another hive in order to affect bees, the healthy bees.
There is a specific mite called varroa. It comes from mostly, the most virulent comes from Korea. In the Orient, China, Korea, they didn't have European bees, Apis mellifera. They had their own local versions that, again, over millennia, they found the defenses against the local parasites. One of them is a tiny mite, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
Because they imported the European bees to that area, so they were getting parasited with them, and gradually moved into Russia. In Russia, they were studying it, and then it escaped from Russia, and it went like wildfire through Europe, and then it passed to America, to other areas where, like even New Zealand, to other areas that they had European bees.
Okay.
And virtually every single wild swarm in Europe, or they had escaped in America, or for instance in Australia, South America, were decimated. Feral is the term in those areas. Were decimated by the varroa. And the only way that beekeepers could, still today the same, can keep them go is to treat them in the hive through aromatic oils, for instance, like thyme. But very quickly the varroa gets immunity to those.
Yeah.
They have to find
Okay.
them new ones all the time.
Does it relate to any specific continent? Because they said that they escaped from Russia, unfortunately. But
No, but it comes from Korea.
okay.
And they reached Russia, and they were studying them in Russia,
Okay.
some laboratory. And for some reason, they escaped from the laboratory and
But does it mean, for instance, that in Europe there are more mites than in Africa, or maybe in some other continent?
You see, so those mites, again, the very virulent ones come from Korea. And with the mites comes all sorts of parasitic microbes, virus.
Okay.
And so not only those mites parasiting them and sucking the blood of the young larvae,
Yeah.
also bring them a very nasty virus.
Okay.
But they arrived here in South Africa, and our bees very quickly found ways to combat them.
Okay.
I do not have to treat my bees, my hives for anything. They're very tough. Only problems that we have now and then is a parasitic form of the Cape bees. Once they take over a hive, that hive collapse because they breed as if they were every one of them, every female one, if there was a queen.
Okay.
But we're still doing beekeeping in a very successful manner, but we are very aware about it. In main area, actually, one catches them is when we go to the aloes in July, August. So I stop, in a number of other beekeepers stop going there.
Okay.
Because if you go there, you're going to lose about 3/4 of your hives there.
Sure.
In the UK, they started such a movement as to become a beekeeper as one of the prevention measures. Because, I mean, you have a couple of hives, and I'm sure that you started small, and probably now you go more bigger and bigger. So what do you think about it?
It's the greatest hobby. I mean, you could see those.
How did you start?
Oh, well, I started with one. And my family had hives when I was a child. It was part of the culture to be self-sufficient, to have your own honey. You boast about quality of your honey. And in Europe now, especially like in the UK, it's very well to do to go and say, oh, come and taste my honey. I should put my English accent.
Yeah.
And some of them, they said, they move them to the moors for the heather or to any other crop, and even to parts in the continent. They are almost fanatic about it, and it's their hobby to have. You can go to Paris, if they will allow you. You go to the top of the Opera House. There are about 8 hives there.
Okay.
The most prized honey in Japan comes from some hives in the main park, a botanical garden, a huge botanical garden in the center of Tokyo.
Okay.
Because in Japan they have very little crop, natural vegetation diversity. So the honey is nothing special. But there, let's call it Central Park, I mean, it's something special, and you pay to have privilege to taste. It's a number in New York. I heard about a hotel that has some hives in the roof, and they are allowed to go there and watch them through a glass window. And you can point out from which hive you would like to have.
Oh, really?
Breakfast
it's
honey.
like a little bee show. Okay, they can organize a bee show.
In taste afterwards.
Okay, it's only in New York, right?
In here, for instance, in Johannesburg, more and more well-to-do people keep asking me, please, please, put some hives in my garden.
Oh, really?
I won't have my garden to be pollinate my own bees. If I'm going to have my own honey, my life will be complete.
But how dangerous is that actually for people to have their hives, especially for people who really don't have special knowledge, like you are mentioning, in order to complete somebody's life? How do you think it can be dangerous for them?
African bees, extremely productive, more productive than European bees, far more resistant to disease. I mean, productive, can make more honey, double, produce more than double the European bees, more resistance to disease, but they're also extremely protective. Let's call them defensive of their hives. The Americans, with their hyperbole, are you saying English?
Hyperbole, yeah.
Yes. Hyperbole, yes. They call them killer bees.
Okay.
Like the blue gums, they are killer trees. Yes, you keep hearing the news that some people have been stung virtually to death. Cows, horses dead. They have had tough predators, and by Darwinism, if you do not adapt, find a way to survive, you are goners. So the only way the African, with terrible enemies like man and the rattle, the honey badger.
Okay, of course.
If you are weak, for instance, you have 100 hives in a site, it might be a rattle in that area. You go there after a couple of weeks, not one hive is standing, everything is broken to smithers.
Wow.
So we have to find a ways to combat rattle. One of them is to put them on stilts. Other one is make them very well made, very strong, and tie them very strongly to the ground so it cannot push them over and break them to pieces.
Okay.
I'm sure you get asked this often. Have you been stung quite a bit?
Thousands of times. A beekeeper, whatever on earth, is the healthiest person in that particular community, village, whatever. We do not suffer from all sorts of autoimmune problems, arthritis, gout, hypertension, a number of problems.
Why is that?
Because the bee venom keeps us in a very healthy shape.
Oh, wow.
We eat good pollen, good honey, and you are active. A beekeeper never retires. And so we live a healthy, we work hard, and we enjoy life.